So I'm going to read to you now from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 8. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let's make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He didn't know what to say because they were all terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from a cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Now, when I was a kid, I was a child, and I said this at the 8 o'clock, and Cal Rita said, "You're still a child, Gavin." I was like, "Well, thanks for that." But I don't know, my congregation, they do love me, it's okay. But when I was a child, I had a book, and it was called Heroes of the Bible. And it was this big format book, and it had these beautiful, wonderful illustrations in it of all the different Bible characters. I remember there was Daniel in the lion's den. But also, 2 of the ones that struck me were Moses and Elijah. There was Moses with his great big long beard and his staff looking very formidable, a bit like Charlton Heston, right there, with the waves of the Red Sea being parted behind him, and it was like, whoa. And then Elijah, a bit mysterious, kind of dressed in a darker robes with this belt and this, going to look like a wizard, again with a staff, calling down fire from heaven. And I think I remember that I couldn't even read at this point. I think these pictures were just stuck in my mind. And I think I've still got that book somewhere in an attic somewhere. Heroes of the Bible. And they really were heroes. They were the superheroes of the day. If you were a first century child living in Palestine, these would have been your superheroes. And the stories would have been told to you at bedtime about Moses and Elijah and the incredible things that they did and the lives they had and the words they said. And if they were around today, they would have had action figures and they would have had sticker books and the whole branding thing with it, because they really were the superheroes of the day. And actually, if you're a Jewish child today, those stories are still being told. They're still being told, and still probably by candlelight in parts of the world. Moses and Elijah, these 2 great pillars of the Jewish faith, representing the law. Moses represented the law, and Elijah representing the prophets. Although over time, that's what they came to represent, to sum up the law and the prophets. 2 characters that are very different from all the other heroes of the faith for some very important reasons. But what was the purpose? Why Moses? Why Elijah? Well, very simply, their job was to draw people back to God, or to draw people to God in the first place, if you will, to draw this community of faith together and call people back to obedience to God. That's what they did. And Elijah appeared something like 400 years after Moses and about 800 or so years before Christ. These 2 characters. Now, here's the thing about Elijah and Moses, is that Elijah copied Moses. What do I mean by that? Well, Elijah did a lot of things that Moses did. There were echoes of Moses in the life of Elijah. And it wasn't that, and people at the time probably thought, oh wow, it's Moses. Again, he's being like Moses. They would have made the connections between what Elijah was doing and what Moses was doing. And it wasn't that Moses was being had come back in the form of Elijah. And it wasn't that Moses was being, reborn or reincarnated in Elijah. But there's a special word that we use, and it is redivivus. You might come across that word. It's a redivivus. It's a 3rd category, if you will, of somebody being somebody else. and Elijah. In one sense, you could say that Elijah was Moses. In the same way, and we talked about this a few weeks back, John the Baptist was a redivivus of Elijah. The prophet said that Elijah would return before the Messiah came, God's anointed one came, and Jesus said, yes, he did come. He was Elijah. Now, he didn't mean that Elijah had come again in the form of John the Baptist with a different name. And it wasn't that Elijah had been reborn or reincarnated in John the Baptist, but John the Baptist was a redivivus. He echoed, if you like, the heart or the spirit of those that had come before, of Elijah. And of course, if Elijah also echoed Moses, then John the Baptist also echoed Moses too. And Jesus Christ himself was a redivivus of Elijah and Moses. And you'll see why in a moment. He, on purpose, did things that echoed the things that Moses and Elijah did. When Jesus raised a widow's son, everybody would have gone, oh, yeah, I remember that. Elijah did that. He echoed those things. And, if you will, Elijah and Moses, what did they have in common? Well, they both parted waters. They both defeated an evil king, Pharaoh and King Ahab. They both demonstrated the power of God, or allowed God's power to be demonstrated through them. They both had mentees, didn't they? Moses had Joshua, and Elijah had Elisha. And they both had, importantly, as we're coming to talk about the Transfiguration today, both Moses and Elijah had mountaintop experiences, didn't they? They both met God face to face on a mountaintop. Of course, they couldn't look at him. They had to cover their faces. Another important point, as we'll see in a moment. But Moses and Elijah are also very important because they're the only two characters in the Bible who didn't die here on earth. Did you know that? Elijah caught up in a whirlwind, bodily caught up into heaven. There's no grave on earth for Elijah. And in the same way, there's no grave on earth for Moses either. There's kind of mystery surrounding Moses' death. Moses was purported not to have died, taken bodily into heaven. And of course, Jesus Christ was too, wasn't he? Taken through resurrection. But if you will, it gets slightly more complicated because Joshua copied Moses and Elisha copied Elijah. And if Elisha was copying Elijah, who copied Joshua and Moses, then they all copied each other. Does that make sense? Yeah. So they all echoed the things that they did. And here we have, at the end of that Old Testament reading, we have Elijah. And where did he go? Gilgal. He then went to Jericho, an important site, wasn't it, for Joshua? And then, of course, to the Jordan, and parted those waves of the river Jordan. Where was John the Baptist? In the river Jordan. It's all linked, you see. It's all echoing back. But Jesus was different, right? He wasn't just the law or the prophets. He came to sum up the law and the prophets. He was better because he was, of course, God himself. He took those things, those symbols from Moses and Elijah, and took them to another level, if you will. You see, Jesus didn't part waters, did he? No, he walked on them. He didn't just battle a ruthless king. Yeah, sure, in a way he took on Herod, he took on the Roman Empire, but more than that, he defeated evil itself through his words and actions. He was taken, yes, bodily into heaven, if you will, but when he did it, he came back and you could touch him and talk with him. He was this kind of redivivus in a way, but a redivivus on a whole nother level because he was God. And of course, as Moses and Elijah had mentees, they had people that looked up to them, so Jesus had his disciples. And here he is going up a mountain, echoing the mountaintop to meet with God. And of course, he was God. He was transformed. And you saw his, if you like, his godliness, the brightness that he dazzled with and shone with. And there he is with Moses and Elijah. And as they're there, reminiscent of Moses and Elijah having to cover their eyes, a cloud descends. And the voice of God says, "Here's my son, my beloved. Listen to him." Before I go on, I want to rewind a little bit to the story. Because when they get up there, when Moses and Elijah appeared, we read that Peter, typical Peter, with ADHD probably, because he was always the first person to talk, and always the first person to jump off a boat and swim to the shore, and the first to run to the tomb, and the first to say, "If you're going to wash my feet, wash the whole of me." I love Peter. I'm a bit Petery. You can see which one I identify with, right? I love Peter. And I love this. I love this bit in the Bible. He says, "Hey, it's great that we're all here. Hey, woo! Why don't I build a shelter for you, Jesus? I'll build one for Moses and one for Elijah." And I'm sorry if this is if this is heretical, but I almost kind of sense Jesus kind of going, face palming, rolling his eyes and going, you just don't get it, do you? I'm giving you this amazing mountaintop experience. I've just been transfigured. This is the most awesome thing. And you're doing the equivalent of kind of going, "All right, I'll order takeout pizza, shall I? What kind of toppings does everybody want?" Because that's what he was doing. And Jesus is like, no, okay. And then the cloud descends. It's like, "Hey, this is my son, my beloved. Listen to him." I love that. I love the humanity injected in the story. Do you know what I love about the Bible? What I love about the New Testament is you have all these bits in there. If you were writing it for somebody else to believe, if you were trying to write how awesome God, you would leave all those bits out, wouldn't you? You wouldn't write that they messed up, made mistakes, got it the wrong end of the stick. You just wouldn't do it. But Peter, dear Peter, was so focused on their practical needs, wasn't he? Real practical guy, fisherman. "Come on, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to build you some shelters." But he missed the big picture. You see, this theophany, they call it, this manifestation of God, was not a display for its own sake. It wasn't that Jesus was going to go up a mountain and he was going to be transfigured and meet with Joseph, and the disciples just happened to be there. See you later, Carol. And it wasn't just that it was going to happen anyway, and the disciples just happened to be there. No. It was for the disciples. The whole thing was set up for Peter, for James, and for John. That was the purpose of it. And if you had any doubt, who was the voice from the Father talking to? Who was God talking to? Talking to the disciples. "Hey, disciples, Peter, James, and John, this is my son, my beloved. Listen to him." Jesus was transfigured into the glory of God, not for Moses and Elijah's sake. There was absolutely no point in being transfigured unless there was someone to see him be transfigured. It was for the sake of the disciples. It was so that they would draw closer to Jesus, that they would follow him and be with him. And I sometimes wonder why God didn't say, the Father didn't say, "This is my son, my beloved, follow him," or stick close to him, or even obey him. No, listen to him. Listen to him. It's interesting, isn't it? Listen to him. In our lives, I suppose, like those 3 disciples, there are times we don't know what to do. We can be frozen in fear or terrified by the circumstances in which we find ourselves. It's in those times we must remember the voice spoken on that mountaintop. "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." And what did Jesus say? Thank God we have his words written down in our Bibles, that we can any moment of the day or night, you can open a Bible and you can see the words of Jesus. You can read them. You can listen to what Jesus says. Maybe we need to hear Jesus say, "Come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Perhaps we need to hear Jesus say, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Perhaps we need to hear Jesus say, "Know that I am always with you, even to the very end of the age." I don't know if today, like me, you have a tendency to wander from the path, find yourself with tangled thoughts and emotions, feel lost or alone. Listen to Jesus. if you are struggling, if you're going through a hard time, maybe relationships have broken down, you've got issues in your family, listen to Jesus. If you're struggling with your physical or mental health, listen to Jesus. Listen to Jesus. He will lead you to that place of calm, peace, assurance, and security for which your soul longs. Amen.